Uh, Thank you to the Rohingya Academic Research Institute. My understanding is that you are, made up of young Rohingya scholars, researchers, and students from different parts of the world, including in Bangladesh, in the camps, maybe, hopefully. But firstly, I want to say that I'm not speaking only as a student of genocides going back to the Nazi regimes in the Second World War, but I'm speaking as a fellow Myanmar, because Rohingyas are Myanmar people, and I don't talk to you like you are the other. And so that's my
Thank you so
first
much.
point.
It's so kind of you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And second is that I also, because most of you are Rohingya men and women, pursuing knowledge and trying to empower yourself, um, and I want to say how pleased I am to know that this many um, people want to learn about not just the Rohingya situation, your own situation, but what is being done to the Palestinian people. And so you show the capacity to extend your empathy to other fellow oppressed people. And Palestinians, like Rohingyas, are not all Muslim people. There are, Marxists, liberals, secularists, humanists, Muslims, of course, and Christians and atheists. Um, and so, I think like the Rohingyas are also, quite diverse, although most of the Rohingya people subscribe to Islam. But we're not talking about um, um, Islam or religious conflict. We're talking about um, two states, um, you know, implementing policies um, to destroy and remove um, people who are native to the land. In Myanmar's case, in our country's case, it's your people, Rohingya people, that shared Arakan, the ancient Arakan, before Myanmar or Burma was established as a modern nation state with the citizenship rights and democratic rights, federal rights in 1948. So there is something similar to what you are experiencing in Myanmar and what Palestinians have been experiencing since officially 1948.
আরেকটি মিউট করে দিবেন সরি
Yeah, no problem. Somebody forgot to mute.
Yeah. Actually, it happened.
Yeah, I
They don't
think
have a stable network. As soon as they join, just it's okay. Okay.
yeah. Otherwise, like you can control it as the master, host.
Yeah. I can control.
Like mute it. Yeah. So, can I resume?
Yeah, you can share. Yeah, I made you co-host.
Okay.
You can share this.
So the first thing that I want to say substantively is the nature of persecution that has been meted out by both the state of Israel and the state of Myanmar. What is interesting is Myanmar, at the time of its founding in January 1948, everybody knows that 4th of July to be our, no, not 4th of July, sorry, 4th of January 1948 to be the official founding date of the Union of Burma, where the state was supposed to be secular, the separation of church or the Buddhism and or any religion, and political organization we call government, and other organs of the state like judiciary, legislature. So Myanmar or Burma started out as a multi-ethnic, federalist, at least in name, democracy in 1948. By the same token, and in the same year, the state of Israel was founded. Um, you know, so the two states came into existence in exactly the same year. Myanmar in January 1948, and Israel, I think, on the 14th of May 1948. About 4 months or 5 months later, Israel came into being. Um, uh, but in the early days, Myanmar and Israel, I'll use the word Burma because it was known as Burma. Burma and Israel had very, very close bilateral relations. At the time of Israel's founding, Myanmar or Burma was the first non-Western country which was already a part of the United Nations at the time to recognize Israel as a sovereign state. There were many other states that did not recognize Israel as a sovereign state. So the relationship between the relations between Myanmar or Burma and Israel was described by the only woman prime minister, um, a Russian Jewish person migrated or settled in Israel in the 1920s. Her name was Golda Meir, and according to her, the relationship between Myanmar and Israel was, in quote, a love affair. So the two states and the two sets of national leaders were, very much, in tune with one another. U Nu of at the time the Prime Minister of Burma, and David Ben Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. Um, they were, quite close. Ben Gurion came to Burma, in the 1950s, and then also there were some celebrated Israeli IDF generals who visited Myanmar, like Moshe Dayan, who was considered a close friend of General Ne Win. General Ne Win, whom you knew, was really the first architect of ethnic cleansing of Rohingyas, and also that was preceded by the ethnic cleansing of all people of Indian descent from other parts of the country, because the people of Indian ancestry, many of whom were born in Burma and settled and put their roots down, and they were considered the backbone of Burma's commercial class. Businesses were owned by them, and of course, the other groups, Buddhist Myanmar, Chinese, the Shan and others also ran and operate businesses, and they became components of the commercial class. But Ne Win turned racist towards the people of Indian descent, and he, in 1964-65, brought in a economic nationalization program, and that program enabled Ne Win's government officially to nationalize all the businesses, farms, shops, industries, and factories owned by, essentially Myanmar people who happen to have migrated from India over, centuries. Um, and so at the time, a 250,000 Indians had to, were forced out of Myanmar. This I'm talking about 1964, 65, and they were pauperized, or they were made to. They were essentially they lost everything that they had built in Myanmar as Myanmar people. Um, this was 1964, and then in the late 1960s, 67, 68, Ne Win had the plan to go after the Rohingya people, starting in northern Arakan or Rakhine state, but they were engulfed in a more immediate concern, which was the growing armed strength of the Burmese Communist Party, and so Ne Win could not spread the state power or troops thinly. So he focused on trying to put down or to counter the Burmese communist armed offensives. So the Rohingya people were spared, but after the Communist Party was weakened in the late 1970s, because the China began to withdraw its support to the Burmese Communist Party. They decided to, on the Rohingya persecution where they left off. And that was when the Nagamin operation started in February 1978. And I would say that was the genesis or the beginning of Burmese militaries' racist, ethnic cleansing. They're trying to move the Rohingya forcibly out of their ancestral land of northern Arakan. The northern Arakan, as you know, was officially recognized by the state of Burma at the time in 1958 onward as but even earlier, like 1955, 56, during the parliamentary government of Unu's as Mayu administration, named after Mayu mountain range. And also, I believe I've never been to Rakhine, and so you would know better than me, or Mayu River. And so the Mayu administration was made up of 2.5 towns, Budida, Mondo, and parts of Rathay Down. And that was, placed under the direct administration of the Ministry of Defense in the Department of Frontier Affairs. The ethnic nationalities were directly governed in along the Burmese border areas for supposedly military or security reasons by the Ministry of Affairs. And so my connection to the Rohingya issue here is that my own great uncle, my mother's uncle, was the deputy commander, regional commander of Rakhine State. At the time, it's called All Rakhine Command. So he was number 2 in charge of the entire Rakhine State. And by virtue of his position as the deputy commander of Rakhine State, he was also the deputy chief of the Mayu administration with Rohingya people. So he recognized in his writing Rohingya community as Rohingya people, right? And so, but that's where the Palestine issue and Rohingya issue began to diverge, right? One was that both the Rohingya and like I said, the Rohingya and Palestinians live on their own ancestral land. In Palestinian Arabs in Palestine before the founding of Israel in 1948, and Rohingya people lived in northern Rakhine State before the borders between, at the time, East Pakistan, and then after 1971 War of Liberation, the new state of Bangladesh. So Rohingyas and Palestinians, I should say Palestinian Arabs, they were majority in their own respective land, on their own respective land. You call it Northern Rakhine State or Arakan at the time. And the Palestinians, they lived on Palestinian land. Initially, for centuries, Palestine was controlled by the Ottoman, the Turks. But the Palestinians did not want to be colonized by anyone, whether it was a Muslim Ottoman Empire or a Christian British colonial administration after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1915 at the end of the Second World War, 1918. They wanted to be free. And by the same token, the difference here is that the Rohingya people never fought for independence, although there may be a small number of Rohingya leaders who wanted to, take Northern Arakan and joined, East Pakistan at the time in 1948. But that question was resolved at the meeting I believe in Karachi, between Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, made up of East and West Pakistan in 1947, and the founder of essentially modern political state known as Union of Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi's father. And so Jinnah and Aung San met in Karachi, and Aung San met with Nehru in New Delhi on his way to London to negotiate for Myanmar's transfer of sovereignty from Britain to the Burmese the leadership in 1947. And so in the meeting with Jinnah, Aung San was told by Jinnah that the Muslims of Arakan, they were your people. They were part of Burma, and we, as a new Pakistan, we're not going to take a slice of Arakan into East Pakistan, and so we will not interfere. They are your people. Treat them as your people. So that question was settled. So here, what emerged was that Rohingya Muslims, whether they are called at the time Rakhine Muslims or Muslims of Rakhine or Rohingya, did not really matter at the time and still doesn't matter. What matters is the community that call themselves Rohingya, whether they call themselves Rohingya only in the in the late 18th century, as the archival records show, or the only in the 1950s as a political movement trying to push back the anti-Indian, anti-Muslim racism coming from Rakhine and to a lesser perhaps extent the Burmese military. And so Rohingyas have been a part of Myanmar. They were recognized officially. And by the same token, Palestinian people have always been on that land. But Palestinian people are not a monolith, meaning they are not just one uniform ethnic group or one religious group. They have multiple religious backgrounds, and they have like multiple ethnic backgrounds. But even there were Palestinians who were Jewish. They have been there for long before the state of Israel was established in 1948. And so another thing that we need to understand here is that uh, aside from the first commonality between our Rohingya people and Palestinian people, they were native to the land where the new states tried to expel them from violently, right? That's the number one commonality. The other commonality is that the you know the new states, Israel and Burma, after 1978, after the Nagamin operation, um, both Israel and Myanmar militaries and political organizations and educational ministry, media, the dominant religious organizations, in the case of Palestine, it's like the Jewish Zionist or Jewish synagogues and other religious organizations, as well as judicial organs. They sought to, they attempted to erase uh, the Palestinian history, names of Palestinian villages and towns. First, they erased the Palestinian. They destroyed Palestinian villages and cities. 11 cities that were predominantly, meaning like more than 50-60% Arab Palestinian population. 11 of them were destroyed, physically destroyed, like blown up with dynamite. The all the broken pieces of buildings were used to build the roads, and on top of these like rubbles, the city of Tel Aviv emerged. The same in other places like Haifa, you know, and so first is a physical destruction that of residential and businesses and mosques, and not just mosques, the Christian churches as well. 1,000 places of worship were destroyed by the newly emerging state of Israel and its Israeli defense forces. The IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, was made up of three major terrorist organizations. They were called Jewish terrorist organizations, even by the British press, because in 1946, I believe like 22nd of July, last yesterday, or that the day before yesterday, 22nd or 23rd, which one I'm not sure. But 1946, the one of the three armed, uh, founding armed organizations blew up a huge hotel called King David in Jerusalem, where the British colonial government kept its headquarters, and killed over 90 people, all civilians, and several dozen Palestinians were killed, British officers were killed, and visitors were killed. And so that was one of the earliest terrorist strikes that the founders or founding organizations of Israel was engaged in. But in the case of Myanmar, the Burmese military started out as an anti-British colonial, resistance force founded, and funded and trained by the Japanese imperialists, in the middle of this Second World War. I mean, this history of the founding of the Burmese military. So it had, you know, I would honestly argue Myanmar military or Tatmadaw a more legitimate and higher purpose than the Israeli Defense Force, because IDF essentially was, you know, uh, forged as the spearhead of this genocidal movement, led by David Ben Gurion, um, to take over the land of Palestine from the native people. Whereas, in fact, Myanmar military, Tatmadaw, which in the 1970s onward until now turned into a genocidal, national armed forces, started out as a national liberation armed organization against the colonial British. So that is a second, not a second. That is something that needs to be kept in mind. In the case of the Israeli Defense Force, it has always been this genocidal armed wing of the Zionist project. What is a Zionist project? Well, Zionist project was essentially a political project. It has nothing to do with Judaism as a religion or a faith. That people like Einstein, and there's some famous people that were Jewish. Some were observing Jews, meaning that they practiced Judaism, and some were not interested in religion or faith or God, and they pursue their scientific research. They pursue their people like Karl Marx, also Jewish. Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union, the leader of the Bolshevik. Um, they had Jewish mothers, but they did not practice or pursue Judaism, and they were humanist. They are interested in the equality and well-being and the brotherhood or sisterhood of all humans across the world. So they pursue like internationalist, movements. Whether they succeeded or not is a different question. But they're not, they had Jewish background, but they did not front load their identity as Jewish, the scholars or revolutionaries, right? Um, that's something that the Nazis, led by Hitler and others, imposed on these leftist leaders, the intellectuals with Jewish background, who did not consider themselves as first and foremost Jews, but they consider themselves as part of like different national communities. So the Zionist project was about creating a political state that would be majority Jewish, yeah, because the Jewish people had always lived as national minorities across different Christian or predominantly Christian European states, for centuries. And so there were some prejudices, and what is known as like basically anti-Semitism, like fear and loathing of the Jewish people out of the Christian European kingdoms and later Christian European states, and even like a Soviet Union had this anti-Jewish racism under Stalin and before, and as well as like during the feudal period. And so the anti-Jewish racism was exclusively racism that developed on the Christian soil, because rightly or wrongly, the Jewish, Christians believe or have been taught that the Jews were behind the crucifixion or the killing of Jesus Christ. So the Jews were portrayed over the centuries as the Christ killers, right? And so so that racism is exclusively European racism and Europe of Christendom. I'm talking about, and so the Zionist, around 1890s, led by Eastern European Jewish journalists and some intellectuals and activists from Belarus, what is now Ukraine. Today, at the time, this was part of the Tsarist Russia, and also Poland, essentially Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, these like Eastern European countries. That the Jewish intellectuals sort of split between those who want to pursue this ethno nationalism, whose aim was to create the Jewish national homeland. In other words, a new political state that was, to be made up of majority, if not, fully Jewish, majority Jewish state. It had nothing to do with Judaism, right? But the only problem there was that at the time the Jewish people was were so scattered across Europe, and they did not have enough power to build this new state, and so they hedged this Zionist project and idea as something of a dependent initiative which require Western imperialist or some kind of external imperialist power to support it. So initially, that they were looking at different places to build this country, or the state, I should say. But they were looking at not empty places. They were looking at places that were inhabited by native people. Some of them even look at places in Africa, to build this new political state where they would be the majority, because the Zionists always felt that, or one logic of Zionism was that the Jewish people had been persecuted over centuries because they were not majority. They did not have a state of their own. They were always minorities, so there were always prejudices against minorities based on religion, based on their economic might, all of the banking, the control over banking. If you say that, Jewish people control banking systems in Europe, then like today, you can be accused of, being anti-Semitic, right? So anyway, they wanted to build this new state in Palestine. So they went to the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul. They tried to lobby, that's like today's language. They would they would try to persuade the Ottoman emperor to allow them a piece of land so that they could build, the new state. And they went to Kaiser. This I'm talking about, before the First World War. This started out around 1890s, early 1890s. You probably heard of the World Zionist Congress held the first one was held in Basel, Switzerland. led by a Czech Jewish journalist by the name of Theodor Herzl. He was based in Austria at the time, but he was Czech Jew. Um, and they bounce around. They lobby any external imperialist power, whether it's German or Turkish Ottomans, and then finally they got lucky with the British. During the Ottoman time, they did not get anything from the Ottoman Empire or the Kaiser from Germany, but they finally got agreement or like a permission from the British imperialist government in London in 1917. There's a famous 200 words letter signed by the British Foreign Secretary, that is like Minister of Foreign Affairs, Balfour, Lord Balfour, to one of the richest Jewish banking families in the whole of Europe or in the world, named Rothschild, and in that letter, the Zionist Jews. There were so different types of Jews. The political Zionists were the ones who wanted to build a new political state on some land, whether there were people existing or not. And and so in that letter, the British Foreign Secretary promised uh, you know uh, uh, I'm talking about 1917 October. By then, Ottoman had lost the control of uh, Palestine, and so the British colonizers took over control of Palestine. It's called a British Mandate, and the British took over the land because the Ottoman Empire collapsed towards the end of the First World War. And so the British gave away the land without consulting with the majority Arab Palestinian population living on the in Palestine, right? But that letter had two parts. One was that okay, you can build a Jewish national homeland, in the British controlled Palestine, but your new state must not in any way harm the welfare and rights and interest of the native Arab population. So the Zionists completely ignore the second part that require them to basically not attack and not steal more than they were given by the British. But even giving away the British giving away the land without any consultation, any input from the native Arab population, a majority of whom are Muslims, um, was it was outrageous act. It was an outrageous act. And then in 1947, the Palestinian Arabs and the Zionist Jews, that the conflict was reaching the point where the British no longer wanted to get involved because that they were getting killed, targeted by the Zionist Jewish terrorist organizations that I mentioned earlier, including the one that blew up the King David Hotel in 1946, this month in Jerusalem. And so the British washed their hands off and then handed over the problem they created to the newly established United Nations. And the United Nations also came in. UN was at the time controlled by the Western Christian winners of the Second World War, the British, France, United States, Canada, Australia, and these countries, right? These states. And so they gave away, they sliced Palestine, and gave, a little bit more than half to the Zionist Jews that had never lived in Palestine, in any like recorded history except the Bible. And then they gave less than 50% to the Palestinians. And then in 1948, the uh, actually the partition happened in the fall or autumn of 1947, around October, November. The Zionist terrorist organization started to attack cities and towns that were located outside the UN partition territories for the Zionist Jews. And so they wanted more land than they were granted by the United Nations, right? And what's interesting is that the year Israel was founded, 1948, was also the year the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was invented or adopted by the United Nations. And so you've got two things that were happening: the newly established United Nations adopting the Genocide Convention in December 1948, while having the very same organization allowing or looking the other way, the Zionist Jews terrorizing, the native Arab Palestinian populations from 11 different cities and close to 600 Palestinian villages in the very first wave of genocide that was known as Nakba. And close to 750,000 Palestinians were driven out of their villages and towns. And many of them thought that they would come back. So the Palestinian symbol is the key to their homes. They just lock up and ran away, thinking that they will go back, they will return. That's why they keep a lot of them were left with paper that they own the land, the land deeds from the Ottoman era, yeah, and the key from the old Palestinians who were driven out in 1947 fall and 1948 until the founding of Israel in May, the middle of May, by the Jewish terrorists. So the Israeli state was from the very beginning a land thieving settler colonial state led by Eastern European Jews that never lived there, that did not know even how to make hummus, yeah, that they ate a different type of bread from the Arab bread, right? And so, aside from the cultural differences in food and customs, this was a new political state that was designed as the majority Jewish state on the land. The residential population majority was Arab. So they had to resort to ethnic cleansing. So the Israel was founded on ethnic cleansing of 740,000. That's close. Let's just say about a 250,000 shy of a million population driven out of Palestine. Yeah, in 1948, that was the number that the Rohingyas, survivors, 730,000 in 2017. The Rohingya, your community also suffered that kind of ethnic cleansing. The land was taken over by the state of Myanmar at the time, with Aung San Suu Kyi as the the de facto head of state, or at least like the running the hybrid government with the Myanmar military. And so both Rohingyas and the Palestinians suffer similar atrocity at the hand of two different states led by the military, the IDF in Israel and Tamador in Myanmar, right? So the only difference is that Myanmar army also, the Rakhine also, like if we look at Rakhine or Arakan Kingdom historically, it was also a land annexed by the Myanmar people. I'm Myanmar and Buddhist and from a military family. So, to be very blunt, we also stole by arm the Arakan from the Arakanis. Arakanis were, multiple faith people, Muslims and Buddhists, Rakhines, and, and there's so many other people, because Arakan has been still, geographically, it is a coastal region. And like all coastal regions, you always absorb people, migrants and merchants and traders from other parts of the world. And so Arakan is very diverse ethnically and religion-wise. But the other, so we are talking about two pieces of land that were taken by force of arm, by wars, by genocides, by the state of Myanmar, the Old Kingdom, and by the state of Israel from 1947-48 onward. So another commonality is we're talking about the land that was grabbed by force of arm by state of Israel and by the state of ancient Myanmar, and now the state of Myanmar in 2025, and the both Rohingyas and Palestinians can prove themselves to be owners of parts of this land, right? In the case of Palestinians, there are 7 million Palestinians in different parts of occupied Palestine and the 1948 Israel, right? So the 2.3, 2.4 million in Gaza. I would say, I would go with the higher estimates of the casualty rates. 400,000, 500,000 have been basically mass slaughtered by different methods in the last almost 2 years, since October 8th, 2023, by the state of Israel, supported by the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, European Union, and much of the mass media, CNN, BBC, New York Times, these organizations, they were all part of this, the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And then there's also about 3 million in what is known as the West Bank. They live as second, third class, basically colonial subjects under heavy military control of the Israeli Defense Force. And then there's about 1.5 million Arab Israelis. They're Palestinians who remained, who were trapped or who stayed without running away during the Nakba of 1948. They were citizens of Israel, but they had no rights, no equality. It's that's another similarity. There are the Rohingyas who stay within Myanmar, did not flee. They never enjoyed equal citizenship, equal rights. And in the case of Rohingyas in Myanmar, they're even treated far worse than the Arab or Palestinian Israelis. by the state of Israel. Like many of the Rohingyas could not attend the university, so if they could not study professional subjects, they could not join civil servants, that kind of thing, right? Service. The other uh, uh, point I wish to compare is those who are feeding the Rohingyas, close to 1 million refugees or survivors in Bangladesh, namely the United States, the European Union, UK, these political regimes in the West that provide, food and political support to the Rohingyas, uh, are the very same states that are 100% directly involved in the current genocide of Palestinian people by the state of Israel. Yeah. And so I understand, like, a lot of like Rohingya people, rightly appreciative of the fact that the money is coming from these, like, Western European states within the European Union, as well as from Canada and USA. And also, like, there are two cases. Both the state of Israel and the state of Myanmar are facing genocide proceedings at the International Court of Justice. And both states have ignored provisional rulings to treat or to reverse the course of genocide. Yeah. Um, Against both Palestinian people and the Rohingya people. So that's one commonality. That is, like, both perpetrating states of Israel and Myanmar have absolutely no regard for international law. And in the case of Israel, this disregard is fully joined and backed by NATO, European Union, and most importantly, the United States. Yeah. And these states like Canada, USA, Germany, Netherlands, they had filed legal support against the state of Myanmar that is, accused of committing genocide against Rohingya people at the ICJ. But at the same time, the same set of Western states join Israel and support Israel at the International Court of Justice, against any legal attempt to take the state of Israel accountable under International Genocide Convention. And so I think, like, there's also a very, very sharp contrast between how these Western states behave. On one hand, they are fully involved. They fund Israel. They give Israel billions of dollars of worth of weapons that are used to essentially destroy 90% of Gaza and slaughter an upwards of, I would say, 400,000, 500,000. And Israel is starving as we speak. They're blocking, like, even baby formula, that, milk powder. Milk, terrorists don't drink milk powder. I mean, there are also, I don't. Let me just say, like, Hamas is, like, considered terrorist by Western governments, but if you look at objectively, any oppressed community under international law and through the eyes of morals and ethics over different civilizational era, the oppressed have the right to resist by any means they deem fit. So the oppressed do not have to seek dialogue and non-violent methods to resist. and then none of us who is not oppressed is in a moral position to say what methods that the oppressed people, the victims of genocide, must resort to. You cannot just tell the Palestinian you have to only dialogue and you have to negotiate. Well, if they cannot bear the oppression any longer, they are under international law entitled to resist, through armed struggle. That was how the Burmese, tried to resist the British the rule. That was how the Burmese tried to fight back the fascist Japan's occupation of Burma for 3 years through armed resistance. That is what the new generation of Burmese people today are doing. And, Rakhines and others also have taken up arms against the Myanmar military that is genocidal, colonizing, and racist toward non Buddhists. And they're also killing Buddhist communities that resist. And so we cannot say that Rohingya who take up arms to fight back against either the Arakan army or the Myanmar military is terrorist. We cannot call a community of oppressed people who fight back through armed struggle as terrorists simply because of their religion. We don't usually call Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and Jews terrorists because they take up arms for their liberation. Why should we allow the world to call the Muslims who fight back terrorists, to call the armed Muslim organizations who fought genocidal militaries and genocidal regimes terrorists itself is racist? And so I think that there are quite a lot of things here. But the last thing I want to say is, the no genocide is simply about racism or religious bigotry. Genocides always come with material commercial benefits, and those benefits accrue to the killers. The Nazis got gold teeth that were melted into gold bars, and then they deposited them at the different banks in Switzerland. Yeah, they got the businesses and the buildings and others that the Jewish people had to leave behind. By the same token, Israel, what didn't just take the land. Israel took a piano, motorcycle, cars, businesses, factories, orange farm, the orchards, the what you call it, olive or farms. So when the Palestinian people, close to 1,750,000, when they were forced to flee for their lives in 1947 and 48, like close to $2 billion worth of your Palestinian property were looted by Zionist Jews that later became Israelis. That these were all very well documented in the Israeli Defense Force documents.